For years, North Dakota's critical level for potassium was set at 150 part per million. But after gaining a better understanding of the clay chemistry, in some soils we needed to raise that critical level to 200 ppm. We believe this change in recommendation will increase the profitability to about a third of the corn growers in North Dakota, and it may help people in other parts of the Midwest do the same after they look at their clay chemistry. 40 years ago, the native potassium levels in our soil were very high, so nobody really paid any attention to them. So they borrowed our potassium recommendations for corn from the I states, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, at 150 part per million.
For many decades, the game was wheat. Now the game is corn and soybeans. The crop shift to more corn and soybeans is important because soybeans remove about 3 times more potassium and corn about 2 times more potassium in the grain than a good wheat crop used to. So we're taking out a lot more.
And because of the huge decline in potassium levels, it was just time to look at potassium.
From 2014 to 2016, we did a recalibration study. We were really checking to see if that critical level of 150 parts per million was correct.
We set up potassium rate trials in the counties where corn has been grown the longest: Cass, Richland, Barnes, Ransom, and Sargent counties. We set up and harvested 29 experimental sites. When we first set up these experiments, I thought this would be very easy. Confirm the 150 or not, and then that'd be it. We move on. And that's not how it worked at all.
We found that the current critical level of 150 parts per million only predicted about half of the yield responses we expected. So we started to look at soil type because we thought that would make a difference.
So because we thought clay chemistry might be important, we took those samples and we sent them off to a lab for clay species analysis.
And it turned out that we had soils with significant amounts of smectite and illite that we didn't think we had before.
We went through clustering analysis, and we found a common theme that soils that had a smectite-illite ratio greater than 3.5, the critical level needed to be 200 ppm, not the 150 ppm that we had before. So the reason for this is that smectites provide potassium when it's moist, but when it's dry, it draws the potassium back into the inner layers.
So when these smectites get on the dry side, the layers start to close down and the potassium ions can't get in and out as easily.
So the soil test needs to be higher to overwhelm the effect of the unavailability during dry conditions, which means that if you have a soil test less than 200 ppm, you'll get an economic return from addition of potash. To put that in context, let's take a 1,250 acre farm. Farmers growing corn, they have a soil test potassium level 125 ppm, and the soil has a smectite-illite ratio greater than 3.5. So if we applied potassium at a rate of, say, 90 pounds of K2O an acre, which is about 150 pounds of 0060, based on the new critical level of 200 ppm, we'd expect the yield to be increased by about 20 bushels an acre. At $3.50 corn, that amounts to about $70 an acre. If we subtract the cost of the potassium, which is $24 an acre, then we're looking at a net gain of $46 an acre, and if you multiply that times the 1,250 acre farm, you're looking at a net return of $57,500. So we were excited, but if we went in front of a bunch of growers and said, if your smectite ratio is greater than 3.5, do this, they just look at each other like, what are you talking about? So we needed to have some kind of a map. And so last spring, went out and took soil samples from every county and had them analyzed.
I was out there sampling and then would bring them back to the lab. Over 1,300 soil samples collected in 2 years.
We find that not only did we have a smectite-illite ratio greater than 3.5, but in some areas we had a smectite ratio even greater than 5. Theoretically, this means that by following these new recommendations, a third of the corn growers in North Dakota would earn thousands more than they do right now. The other reason this is significant is because North Dakota is not the only area that has this clay chemistry, but there are hundreds of thousands of acres across the Midwest that have smectite-illites also.
Hopefully, it'll spark a potassium research renaissance across the rest of the Midwest for guys to seriously look at potassium mineralogy, or they can manage at the 200 part per million critical level just to play it safe.
I mean, these recommendations are economics driven. If your soil test shows that you need to apply potash for your corn crop, there's money at the end of that.